Welcome to the Vet Med Wellness and Leadership Podcast, where we discuss central challenges vet med leaders face, such as burnout, stress, and difficult interactions with clients and staff, just to name a few. In each episode, you will hear about actionable solutions that you can apply to your practice and invitations to connect with fellow leaders who are passionate about improving the wellness of the vet med profession. By subscribing, liking, commenting, or sharing this podcast, you are helping more veterinary professionals find the resources shared in these episodes. Thank you in advance for listening and supporting this show. I hope you enjoy it. All right. Hey, everybody. Crystal Stokes here, and joining me today is Dr. Sarah Gillings, who has practiced in general medicine for several years prior to completing a residency in medical oncology at NC State University. Go Wolfpack. And in addition to clinical practice, her career has included roles as a practice owner, leader, medical director, and active volunteer in leadership at the ACVIM. And today we are going to talk about her leadership development journey and identify key lessons that you can apply to how you lead your team. So Sarah, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're welcome. Well, we had talked about starting off with an icebreaker today, so we have a fun one. It's a sweet one. So I was going to ask you, when you were a little child, did you have a favorite like binky or blanket or teddy bear? And if so, where is it today?
I do. I have a stuffed possum, and I don't remember dragging him around or anything like that, but he ended up kind of just being around and in my room, and something that is now still sitting in my room. And I must have worn him out quite a bit, because like one of the little links on his tail has, the felt is like worn through, and there's a little bit of stuffing there. So he just kind of hangs out in the room.
So sweet. I love that it's still hanging around to this day.
Absolutely.
I'm the same way. I have a teddy bear, and he's been with me since I was like 1, and he looks like it. Like he has seen some things, I was like, he lives in my closet. It's like he's close by, but I can remember my mom saying like, we have to wash that thing. And she'd put him in a like pillowcase and try to wash it. He'd fall apart.
Yeah, exactly.
Stay attached to you. That's really sweet. So kicking this off today, talking about your leadership journey, what if we go back in time? We start off, with your first experiences stepping into a leadership role.
Oh, man. Probably that goes all the way back. Like I remember doing activities even in middle school and high school. I don't entirely remember how I got into that situation. But for example, I think I lobbied our middle school to allow us to set up like a candy reselling thing in the afternoons. And I'm sure I was funding something with that. But anyway, so probably formally, it's going to be after vet school and coming out into practice, where I think I've always had kind of an owner mentality and been very interested in sort of the image that the practice puts out, and how we position ourselves and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So you have like the big picture in mind right away of how are we seen to the community, and how do we shape that?
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. I can also zoom very intensely on details though. So I have this unique opportunity of both being able to kind of zoom out and or see layers and elements of things, but also being able to get down into the detail.
That's a great skill set to have, because most people are kind of one or the other, but it's nice to have both.
Yeah.
As we're looking at given where you are now, and you're looking back through time, and you're kind of mining out the lessons that you've learned in your own developmental journey, where would you like to start with that? Let's try and there's people who are listening today, they're probably attracted to the title of this podcast, or thinking, well, I'm in a leadership role, or I'm looking at becoming one, like it's in my future. And I have a feeling that there are things that I don't know that I don't know. And it's great.
Absolutely.
More seasoned. So let's start off with some of these things of what they should be paying attention to that you now know, looking back on, you did not know.
Absolutely. Yes. I think probably very early on when I was an intern, I had an experience and an interaction with one of our employees that made me really realize how much people paid attention to me. Like and me as sort of all doctors, right? I hadn't ever put that together before. So this particular situation was we were on overnights and we had a really exceptional front desk representative on our overnights. She was amazing. She always had the information that you wanted, and it was just a real joy to work with her. So as the clinician, she would come back and she would, say, I have XYZ on the phone, right? And you would ask questions and she would give you answers. And so there was one night when we went back and forth probably a dozen times where she had information and I would ask for another question. She would have that information and I would ask another question. And there was this moment where I asked her a question that she didn't know the answer to. And for the first time, she was like, oh, I thought I had you this time. And that was the first indication that I had that she was taking all of our questions as a challenge, right? She wanted to stump us and hadn't told any of us that was what was going on. And so, we had a conversation about that later that evening, and it just became a real big eye-opener to me that anybody could feel like that, right? And want to, it kind of changes how they engage with you as a doctor. And so knowing that's happening, right? When I look back on that now, that is a personality type that is very easy to work with, but it makes it really hard to work with people of other personality types who maybe aren't so personally driven, personally motivated. It very much, because I've had other experiences where team members have been frustrated because they feel like my expectations are too high. And certainly my expectations are high, but what I think the biggest lesson is that's very, very clear is that you have to set a super clear expectation for what the minimum expectation is and what represents going above that, right? So you have to say, look, this is the bar that I want everybody to meet. And it's right there. And I may ask you questions beyond that bar, but this is still the bar. You have to be really, really explicit, because it's really easy for the perception to sort of drift over time and for people to believe that your expectations are higher than they are, right?
Yeah, for sure. I can see that where you talked about how different people might respond to your style, where some see it as kind of a fun challenge or a game. Like, what's the next level that she's going to push me to?
Right.
I'm going to get ready for that. Whereas someone else might feel like, you're just beating me down. I can never win with you, right? It's never good enough. Why bother trying? And they become like that learned helplessness thing can kick in. So what you're saying, if I can say it back to you, as a leader, kind of takeaway number one is you have to be very explicit in your level of expectation. So say with your CSRs, all CSRs, these are the things that you'd be required to know. So if I ask you a question on this list, you should be able to answer those questions. If I ask you something beyond the scope of this, it's okay that you don't know it, but if you want to learn it, that's fun too, but it's not required. Same thing for your technical staff, that you'd have the same, like, very clear expectations of what they are expected to know or do.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. That's exactly right.
How do you feel as a leader when you go past that level, right? So you ask a question or you ask for a task be completed that's beyond what you have set for that level of expectation. How does it feel to you when a person pushes back and says, hey, that's not on the list, I don't know how to do it? No. I'm certainly not bothered by it, right? And it's actually an opportunity. So it either means that I have asked too much and I need to just step in and do the thing, right? And we get that a lot with communications. My team is very highly trained in communications now, and they handle a lot of the very basic kind of repetitive client questions that come up over and over. They also have a really good radar for when they need to involve us. And also I have developed a bigger sensitivity over time to recognizing that if it's taking me too long to explain the thing, I need to just do the thing.
basically that. So, and then there's an opportunity as well, kind of separately after the task is done, of you can go back to that staff member and potentially give them an opportunity to say, do you want to learn that skill set or that information base? Because we can work on that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So it's basically having the awareness that sometimes in the moment might not be the appropriate time for teaching, but we can still pin it for later. And if you're finding yourself getting frustrated as a leader with having to explain it, but the time is ticking by, you need to get this thing done, you might just want to step in and then teach it later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly.
I love that. Can we go back to something you were kind of, I think, illuminating earlier? I want to make sure we kind of come to this, is that part of people really looked up to you or noticed you in the hospital. Like, and you realize as a doctor, eyes are on you. Talk more about how important that is and how we should think about that as a budding leader, knowing that, or trying to recognize how much of an influence you really have. Can you give us an example of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think just being a DVM in a hospital puts you in a leadership position. You don't need to have, we've actually, when I was directly involved in recruiting doctors, we always had a couple leadership questions in the interview. And I explicitly made it kind of vague because I was looking for how people were going to interpret that on their own. And that was equally as important as kind of what their thought on it was. It doesn't matter if you have a positional role in leadership in the hospital. You don't need to be a manager or a department head or whatever. As a DVM, you are a leader, period. And you kind of can't escape that. So it means that, unfortunately, in many ways, your emotional regulation, your the way that you choose to engage with stress or stressful situations, the way that you would choose to engage with teammates at any level, all of that is being watched. And all of that has the potential to influence your team. So one example that I have is fairly early on when I was practicing as a solo oncologist, there was a lot of stress. And there were moments when I would notice that my team would look at an email or information from a referring vet, and they would make kind of some semi-snarky comments. And there was a moment when I picked up and realized that they were just echoing things that they'd heard me say every once in a while when I was definitely not at my best. And as soon as I recognized that, I knew I had to stop. So it doesn't matter how tired I am. It doesn't matter how stressed I am. I can't say those things that, to be honest, aren't real, right? They're unkind, they're uninformed, they're not fair. And we all think them, we all feel them, but it's not the climate that I wanted to create and to be in.
It sounds like you're practicing emotional regulation where you have an emotional experience on the inside, but you're able to pause and have the awareness that if that escapes out of your mouth, it's going to impact the entire team and might set a tone or precedence that you don't want to set. So the mindful part of you is going, what kind of culture do I want to build at this hospital? How do I want them to feel about referring DVMs? Or, how do I want them to feel about challenging clients? And what's the, it's kind of the big picture visionary view of what you want to cultivate for your team. Even though on the inside, you're having a difficult emotional experience, you're able to regulate that emotion, keep it on the inside, process it, work through it without spilling it out onto your team.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. You have to be very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have to be very, very intentional, and you have to understand that everything that actually gets verbalized has an impact. It's not that it might have an impact. It does have an impact, and that might be a good impact, and it might be a bad impact. And so you have to be very calculated and intentional with those things. And sometimes that means that so that means I also have to talk my staff through moments where I'm dealing with something on my own internally that isn't like it's not for them, right? And it's not about them. So it's really difficult sometimes to even just be quiet as a reaction and sit with something and not have people around you think that it's about them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to ask you, this question might be a little bit off track, but I'm super curious how you would answer this. Let's say I'm a leader and I understand this concept, but the other day I just got so overwhelmed that some things slipped out of my mouth and I totally regret them now. Like, let's say I kind of talked negatively about another team member that called in sick. And I just thought, oh my gosh, she's doing that again. Like, this is a bunch of crap. And it came out and I said it out loud. How could I, as a leader, clean that up?
Yeah. You have to repair that. So you need to figure out what message you want, first of all, and then go back to the team members that were involved in that communication and say, the other day I said something that I shouldn't have said. It was emotional and it wasn't accurate. I don't know what the situation was. I just was frustrated in the moment, and it's not the way that I want to be. So I shouldn't have said that. And instead this A, B, C, D is what I would want for us to practice.
Got it. Lovely. Well done. I'm thinking back to some of our notes in previous conversations. I was going to ask you about the time where you were feeling like really constrained by the schedule and, you just wanted to kind of do more and like, let's pick up the pace. Like, as an oncologist, I mean, there's such high demand, right? Like, everybody wants to see you now. It's always very urgent and you're very popular, very popular doctors. So tell us about what happened in that situation and the impact it was having on the team that you did not anticipate.
Yeah. So it was a period of weeks to months. It was a small practice and I would challenge the system and add in more things. And I would ask, right? I would always ask, can we do this biopsy? Can we do this thing? And the team would say yes, but it felt like it was a stretch and it felt like it was a strain. And so I started trying to be helpful, right, in those situations. And if it's going to burden the day, then I'm going to do things like, fill out the request form for the extra tests that we're doing, or I'm going to help try to clean up after the procedure. And instead of getting easier and better, it felt like the strain was actually escalating. And I couldn't figure it out. And until there was one day when I was having a conversation with one of the technicians who was also a manager. And the piece that I think will always stand out in my brain was when she hit a kind of peak frustration moment and she said, "You don't trust us to do our jobs." And I was really surprised by that. And I wasn't even hit with feeling like defensive or negative or anything from that. I was so thrilled to actually hear what was underlying their behavior and their reactions that it was like this light bulb went off. And so we then had this very productive conversation. And she basically, out of it said, "You ask. If we say yes because we're willing to do the thing and we're able to do the thing and it's our job to do the thing. So that's it. You ask and we say yes, and then you do your doctor thing and we'll do our thing. And that's the way we want it to be." So it was it was one of those moments where, the impact of understanding that whatever you make up about the behavior and actions that you see in another person is absolutely what you're making up, right? You can interpret it as truth, but it's your truth.
I will say that this happens so often. I think it's part of why I have a job in vet med, because I don't run on assumptions. I'm there to investigate and to really go to people and hear, we saw this behavior. Can you tell me what's happening? Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Because what we do with lack of information is humans naturally fill in the gaps. And we usually fill it in with the worst case scenario thinking. So we assume the worst instead of the best. It's not natural for us to assume positive intent, but we do need to develop that skill. But just investigating is the way to go, to really ask, hey, I'm noticing this. Can we talk about what's happening, and to give them the floor to share with you. And how amazing was that? Like, we never would have guessed that they were feeling, like, I guess their toes are being stepped on in a way, and they wanted to grow into their role and have that autonomy, because a lot of course, that's very important with job satisfaction. And that's what they were wanting more of. So it's really a great example.
Yeah.
How about the example of the client communication? That was another one that you had mentioned, in your team wanting to grow beyond the basic skill sets. They want to take on more.
Yeah. When we started having our team take over some of the client communications directly, the way that we kind of scaffolded that, so they would do a lot of it in-house, right? So they would do a lot of communication with client questions about the basics of chemotherapy side effects and things like that. So a lot of it, they already they'd accumulated a lot of knowledge already. And so the way that we structured having them independently take on more communication expertise was, if an email came in, it would usually go up on the doctor board. We started asking them to go ahead and write down what they thought the answer was. And so then I could take the email and I could take the staff comments and I could go back to that staff member and say, this is perfect. Add one thing. Are you comfortable doing this communication? Take it away. And so over months, really, and at this point, years, luckily we have a really, really stable staff. So knock on wood. And so they've accumulated all of this knowledge and all of this expertise, and their barometer right now is incredible for what they handle on their own and how far they take it on their own before bringing a doctor into the loop directly.
Again, this is the stuff when we study what makes people want to stay in companies. It's having that sense of agency and growth and development in their career. So you're really able to supply that. And I think what I'm mining out, like what's another kind of core takeaway, it sounds like you're describing as a leader, it's really important, one, to not make assumptions and to check and verify with your team. When you think you're seeing something, double check and ask them and see if if your assumptions are true. Don't make assumptions. Mm-hmm. Another takeaway is to allow your team to develop. You set the minimum expectation, but you also support them in advancing.
Absolutely, yes. And it's really, back to the role model and leadership, unconscious, I guess, leader role that we probably all have. I have been told many times throughout my career that both people look up to me and want to work hard for me, and also that I'm very, very intimidating. And I can see the intimidating thing, right? I move fast, I talk fast, I think fast. Like, it's occasionally hard to get my attention. And I've tried to work on my, dialing up my sensitivity on the receiving end of things as well. But I've also tried to be very explicit with my communication, with how I engage with people, very open, very inviting. So if I'm checking in on something, I'm just going to say something like, I feel like there's tension here, but I don't know if that's right. And so is there tension? And if there's tension, what is it coming from?
Yes. So you're not coming in with like your label, like there's tension. Why? Right. Because that can make people feel defensive. Instead, you're saying, this is what I'm sensing. I'm curious to know what you're picking up, and, just to leave it very open.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's beautiful. I'm going back through our notes from our previous conversation, and you had mentioned something that you have kind of borrowed from Adam Grant. I'm a big Adam Grant fan. I think that a lot of his work is so applicable to vet med, and I don't know that he's well known in vet med, but it'd be great if he was. So can you share a bit about that?
Absolutely. So I do listen fairly avidly to his and other podcasts. And there was when I went back and listened to it for detail, because basically I was like, oh, this is a great idea. And then I intend to go back and find it so that I can like write down all the points of it. And when I went back and listened to it again, it was no more than 30 seconds and just almost this like throwaway comment in the scheme of this longer podcast. But basically, the original concept was that in an environment, it was in a consulting environment, where teams form, do their job, dissolve, you make a new team, form, do the job, in that setting, there was a company that had created basically an operator manual for each employee. So, and it was not written by the employee themselves. It was written by the people that worked with them in the group. So it would be things that were extremely positive, and it would be things that some people might interpret as challenging or negative. But of course, we all have different working styles. And so, what one person looks at and says, oh, this person, whatever, is quick to jumping to conclusions, that might be great. And another person might be really bothered by that characteristic. So I took that concept and then I just sort of sat with it for many months, because what I wanted to do was effectively self-design kind of a guide to me. And the things that are most likely to push my buttons, the things that will kind of dysregulate me in a day, the things that matter the most to me. So, I am very, very passionate about the client experience. I am very passionate about setting clients up with really appropriate expectations and then trying to deliver on those expectations. Certainly not to overpromise, right? We have to promise appropriately. So just as an example, I created just a one-page document. I wanted it to be really short, and really drill down. And it's a lot of work.
It's super hard.
Yeah.
To know yourself that well. And I'll say, I have so many things to say about this, but I'll keep it short because this is so exciting for me to hear you say. As a marriage and family therapist, that's the type of license that I have. One of the things that we use, a tool, is kind of this idea of the user's manual for yourself that you would share with your partner, vice versa. So we can, and that applies to teams as well. Like we can use that same concept anywhere. And Adam Grant is highlighting in his podcast, that time it takes to really articulate who you are, what you need, what matters, what sets you off, what fills your cup. It's so intuitive to you or me living in this body that we actually find it really hard to articulate. To put that down on paper in a way that somebody else can understand it, you realize how hard it is to communicate that directly. And so people that work with you have to constantly kind of be on the eggshells of trying to figure out, what is it that makes her pissed off? Like, is it when I'm too slow or if I'm too fast? Was I too detailed or not detailed enough? And, it just takes forever. It's exhausting to try to figure somebody out. So it's a gift to give to somebody to say, hey, here's kind of my operating manual. Now you can know the bare bones of, if you follow that, we're going to be golden. It wouldn't be amazing if we had that for everybody. And I think that some of the team building stuff that we do, like we do the DISC assessment or any type of personality assessment, that's a step in that direction to help people describe who they are and what their strengths and weaknesses are, what their needs are. I love that process. And in a fantasy land, if we could all have that time to really sit down and do this ourselves and share it with our team, it would just be tremendously impactful.
Absolutely. And honestly, I don't even think you need to give it to them in a written form, right? But just going through the process of figuring out, why did that thing set me off, right? And why did this thing set me off? And what are the common themes? Mm-hmm. And that it really does take a lot of work to get down to, what is the underlying value in me? What is the core thing that I'm trying to protect or take care of? Because that is the thing that connects all of the reactions that you have.
Exactly. It's like the linchpin, right? Like there's that root cause kind of thing, getting down to the very bottom of it. And then behaviors will stem from there. I love this so much. I was thinking about how in my version of a user's manual or owner's manual or whatever you want to call it, the type of communication I always love is like bottom lining it. I love when a person come in and be like, bottom line. And if I need more details, I'll ask. But I realize in working, as a therapist, and working alongside many therapists, I think that a different style of communication is often preferred, where they want to start with the details and the story and the context first, because then you feel like, oh, well, now I understand. Then they'll get to the bottom line of it. So learning to value both types, and even myself, like how to communicate in that way. Because sometimes when I come in with the bottom line, people are like, hey, that's a hatchet. Like, whoa. And like, oh, I got to soften that up a little bit, you know? But these different styles that feel so natural to me aren't necessarily natural to others.
Very true. And sometimes it takes, I've worked with a coach in that precise communication style. I was one of the, here's all the things you need to know, and here's the bottom line. And she was like, no, you need to bottom line it. And then you can say, and here's all the information that if you would like to read that, you can have all of this stuff too. But like, this is what you need first. And then, so it's very interesting. I hate the category soft skills. Like it drives me crazy because they're concrete and they're important and they're teachable and they're learnable. And I feel so fortunate to have been invested in education along, communication and writing and speaking and just leadership over the past 20 years.
I 100% agree. Like, I was a hard skills in quotes. That was like the first half of my life. And I didn't value the soft skills at all. But when it comes to actually being an effective leader, you have to be very good at the soft skills. They can be just as important as the hard skills.
Yes.
It can be intimidating. I think if those of us who are naturally good at hard skills, it can feel like trying to learn to write with your non-dominant hand. It can feel very awkward at first. And for those of us that don't like to be bad at things, it's like, oh, I don't want to do it. But if you like a challenge, you just keep practicing. The payoff is just tremendous because you see the ripple effects through your relationships with people, with clients, with team members. And then it just becomes like that positive flywheel up where you want to do more and more because it works so well. It's almost like a secret language. And once you speak it, you're like, oh, they can wink at each other. Like, I get it. Like, you just bottom line that.
Absolutely. Very true.
So as we're coming down the home stretch here, I wanted to kind of tie things into a pretty little bow with your big picture leadership takeaways. That you had a few items that you had listed that I thought were great for people to walk away with. I want them stuck in their brain because they're just so important. Would you mind kind of going through those lists of big picture leadership points?
Yeah. Honestly, I think probably the absolutely most important one is that you have to be able to separate your ego and your own emotional reactions from the impact and the effect that you want to have. And it's difficult to do, and it takes a lot of time to learn how to do that. But once you can, it opens you up to learning a lot more about how to be more effective, learning a lot more about even who you are and how you work. So I think that's probably the most critical skill to have. Paying attention to how people react to you and around you, paying attention to how you are showing up every day and what you're modeling every day, not what you're saying, but what you're actively doing and putting out into the culture. I think those are probably the biggest ones.
I'll piggyback on that and say, for those listening, if you're listening to this and thinking, gosh, I really struggle with this, right? It's so hard for me to keep my emotional responses on the inside. Like, it just seems to come out. I have this, it's like a reactivity thing. It's really hard. It can be embarrassing. If you're looking for tools and modalities to help train that kind of ability to pause and then act in a way that is in alignment with your values, so you can regulate those emotions, I would say look into DBT. It's a type of therapy, but it can be used kind of non-therapeutically, just skills training. It teaches skills in emotional regulation and distress tolerance, as well as mindfulness. So mindfulness, just having the awareness, I'm having emotions. Oh my gosh, they're happening. Then we use distress tolerance and emotional regulation to figure out what to do with those feelings so we can actually have more control. So I'm just like impulsively coming out and then we regret it. It's to have just more of a good relationship with our emotions in a way that feels like it's beneficial to ourselves and the team. So I'll definitely say that. And I think another one of your big picture takeaways that I really loved was your way of viewing feedback. Because as a leader, you're going to get a lot of feedback all the time. People are going to give you feedback, and often it's going to feel like critical feedback. So what is your take on feedback?
Absolutely, yes. Feedback is a gift, period. Sometimes, especially if it's hard to hear, it's a gift. And it doesn't mean that you need to take it all as it comes. It doesn't mean that you need to internalize all of the feedback that you get. You should, particularly with, I think, critical feedback, really sit with it and mine it for kind of what is resonating and what is not resonating. You don't need to have a response in the moment at all. Even if somebody is asking you for a response in the moment, I think it's completely fair to say, I'm going to need to think about this for a few days and schedule a follow-up time. Because, the only way that we don't know what our impact is unless somebody is willing to tell us that. And it's not always lining up with what our intention is. And so if your impact doesn't line up with your intention, it can only be beneficial to know what your impact actually is.
Mm-hmm. I can feel the root of all of what you've said today and your development as a leader has really come down to knowing yourself really, really well, being able to set clear expectations, and then being very thoughtful about the type of team environment that you are creating through role modeling your own self-regulation and ability to handle different situations in front of the team.
You make me sound fantastic.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I hope those listening today can really extract out some of those core lessons and learn from those examples and start applying them to their own leadership journey. It's such an important part of veterinary medicine. And I value the lessons you shared here so much. And I'm sure those listening today are going to want to connect with you. So where is the best place they can find you?
Absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn.
All right. I will put your link in the show notes so people can find it. And Sarah, thanks again for being on with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you feel stoked after listening to this episode. And as always, I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Is there a topic that you want to know more about? Please let me know. And thank you again for subscribing and sharing your favorite episodes with others. It really means a lot.